This is Laura Edell, your Annielytics host, and Annielytics is my podcast on Spotify. I've been doing these bonus segments to do short snippets on things I find interesting in the data science space. This past weekend, I did a presentation at the Women in Data Science Buffalo conference. I found the questions that they asked refreshing and really showing a curious nature of those who came to listen to the presentation I gave on data science is the new superpower. And I started thinking about one of the questions that I was asked, which is, as a woman in technology, when you are in a room that is largely or predominantly male, and you are not being seen as the authority in the room, sometimes often treated as maybe the minute taker as opposed to the leader of the conference room presentation, how do you redirect or channel that energy to make sure that you are heard? And that voice inside your head that can sometimes tell you you're not good enough, leading to the imposter syndrome, where you feel like an imposter in the room, how do you shut that down? And so in today's episode, or bonus, I'm going to walk everybody through my thoughts around the imposter syndrome and how to own a room. You know, being a woman in data science and being a woman in technology, you're going to find that today still there is not enough of us. And women need to support women. And that's why I'm such a big believer in girls in STEM and girls who code, because that's the next generation of women that are going to enter the workplace. And so by inspiring them today, we can get that next generation of women to, choose early, to come into data science, to come into the mathematics and sciences field. And that makes me very excited. But when I was asked the question about what to do when I enter a room full of men at a conference, and am treated like the minute taker or as the secretary, for lack of a better word, one of the things I do first is, in standing up, if somebody's looking at somebody else to answer a question and I'm the one facilitating the asking of the question, I will invite that person in who is seen as the leader. So for example, I enter a room with Bob, fictitious person. Bob and I start presenting. Everyone's directing their questions to Bob. So if I'm the facilitator, to redirect that energy towards me, what I'll say is, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Bob. And by doing so, Bob will automatically give his opinion. When Bob is done, then I will say, to add on to what Bob said, and then I will give my opinion. Sometimes you have to choose your battles. And, one of the battles that I choose not to choose is, do I really care if I vet my opinion before Bob or after? And I don't. Because at the end of the day, it is that inner confidence that you exude, that you know what you're talking about, that then naturally people will gravitate towards you. And so it all comes from being your authentic self. Another point that I want to make is that I have dyslexia and I have a slight speech impediment. And growing up, these were things that, I was made to feel lesser than. And instead now I look at them as tools in my toolkit that actually help me focus on what somebody is saying, because I have to really listen in to make sure A, I heard correctly, and B, that my thoughts don't come out as a jumbled mess. And by doing so, it makes me more of an active listener than maybe another person, because I have to actively listen. Otherwise, I struggle to really comprehend what someone has said. But in my past, I've had bosses and I've had colleagues who asked me if I had things like a tongue ring, back when you were judged for things like your outward persona, though you still are today with unconscious bias or sometimes even conscious bias. But I was drilled into about the fact that I had this tongue ring by a colleague who claimed that I had, failed a presentation because no one could understand me, and how unprofessional it was that I came to this meeting with a tongue ring. And instead of just owning it and explaining my learning disability and explaining the slight lisp that I have, I pulled my tongue out and I took pictures of it and I sent it to my boss, proving I don't have this tongue ring, and made a much bigger deal of it. And when I look back now, I laugh, because all I simply had to do was not hide my learning disabilities and not hide my speech impediment, and explain it to my boss. And then say, sometimes it makes me sound like I have a lisp. And so instead of having what they thought was a tongue ring because of it, it's actually this other thing. Secretly, as a superpower, I could have also felt empowered by hey, you're judging me And in fact, this is something that is qualified as a learning disability. Don't you feel like a jerk? Just kidding. But that's a secret sort of nod to the things we have to deal with growing up. But frankly, I shouldn't have had to even justify it if I did have a tongue ring. And at the end of the day, what happened is I became so insecure when presenting with this person that I thought that they judged me for things that weren't there. I let it get to me in my head. And as soon as you are disingenuous to who you truly are, unauthentic, that shines through. And once that shines through, people stop listening because they don't take you as the authoritarian of that topic space in the room. And so all I can say is this. One, be your authentic self. If you have a tongue ring, you have a tongue ring. Who cares? That's not going to make someone, buy that $1 million deal any more or less than what that salesperson may have been pushing. Two, when you're not your authentic self and you try to, meander around it, like in my case, by not admitting that I had a slight speech impediment, all I did is cause a lack of authenticity to come through that seemed disingenuous. And so I look back now and I wish I could tell my younger self, hey, just own it. Just explain what's going on with you. But it took me many years before I could publicly admit in the workplace that I had dyslexia and that I had these learning disabilities and I actually think them more as learning capabilities. I know that sounds kitsch, but for me, they actually became the capable tools in my toolkit that enabled me to be the data scientist I am today, to be that curious at heart, always questioning, always asking why, to get to the root cause. I'm just a curious learner, and that's who I am. And that all spawned from the tools that I was taught when I was younger to help me overcome the challenges that I experienced learning initially because of my dyslexia. And then, of course, my speech impediment made it even harder because forever I talked like this and no one could understand me. And so now, when it does come through, it's typically when I am in an environment where I am speaking very rapidly, so I'm very excited, or I am in a room where I'm very nervous, so my voice starts to shake. And so another thing that I was asked at the Women in Data Science conference that I thought was interesting is, what do you do when somebody is, shunting a person who's trying to say something? What I mean by that is they're talking over them or they're cutting them off, and you feel empowered to help them. And so I draw my answer back to allyship and what allyship actually means. So what is allyship? So we hear about allies. And so, for example, my podcast is Women in Tech. And so allies are those who support women in tech. And I realized in starting a Women in Tech podcast where I was interviewing only women that I was being exclusionary to others that perhaps are allies of women in tech. So I wanted to better understand what an ally was. And so an ally is somebody who, supports a group that's otherwise not heard. An ally is somebody who individually supports somebody. And that was to be expected to me in terms of my understanding of what to be an ally or allyship was. What was unique to me, though, and what I didn't realize, and this is something that really opened my eyes to the more breadth of what allyship is, and I'll give it to you in this example. In the example where somebody's getting cut off and you call them out, we'll go with Bob again. Let's say Sarah is the quiet person in the room and Bob is cutting them off. Sarah is trying to get a point across. We're in a virtual world. Sometimes it's very hard to do in a conference call. And so let's say I call Bob out and say, Bob, give Sarah a chance to speak. And by doing so, Sarah may be empowered now to say something, but what about Bob? Well, other than being a movie, that's now dating myself, I've actually just shunned Bob publicly. That may have brought him shame or embarrassment. And so by supporting and being a proponent for Sarah, I have now caused detriment to Bob. And that's not being an ally, because by being an ally means you don't support one group by, causing the discomfort of another. And so instead, it's that redirection of saying, those are some great ideas, Bob. Sarah, do you have anything else you'd like to add? So therefore, we have captured what Bob was saying, and then, given Sarah the platform by now which she can answer. So again, it's that redirection of both capturing what one person is saying, but giving the avenue and the vehicle to allow another person who maybe is a little quieter to add on to that. And so again, thank you for listening to this bonus excerpt from the Annielytics podcast about women in tech and just some of the interesting challenges we face when we are presenting in a room full of mostly male colleagues and or presenting just to a room of mostly males. Thank you for listening to Annielytics and helping us grow our listener base, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.